for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus in particular. We are a regional institute across the Caribbean. And I am very much interested in exploring how we can understand, how we can transform our behaviors, our norms, our systems, our structures that are in place so that we do not have to continue to contend with this violence that implicates in so many lives, especially those who are vulnerable, whether it be actual violence, whether it be threatened violence, symbolic violence, or any form of violence that undermines someone's justice, equity, and equality. With that said, welcome to the session, Misogyny at Homes to Manosphere, Making Sense of Gender-Based Violence in the Modern Era. Many of us in this room are aware of what gender-based violence is, but as we live through new times, new changes, new responses, new backlash, new assertions, new advocacy, gender-based violence then, of course, expands to how it is covered. We have to imagine it beyond limited conceptualizations of who is violated, who violates, how violation takes place, and to what extent it has an impact on people's real lives, policy structures, and cultural, political, and psychological frameworks. As we had in our invitation, we addressed the manosphere, especially as this extends into the offline, because we see that violence occurs across multiple contexts, and all of our speakers who will introduce themselves shortly will be able to comment on these series of questions that we will ask to trigger our valuable conversation. But fundamentally, we want to address critical challenges inherited and emerging to gender justice, human rights, the safety of especially women, girls, and marginalized communities everywhere, and to the well-being of boys and men themselves, especially as they are implicated into not only cycles, but acknowledges ideas and beliefs that reconstruct violence as norm. So with that, let me just tell you, we're going to have our questions, we're going to have our discussions. Write down your questions that you may have as you're listening to our speakers, and then we will have a Q&A with the audience, and we will wrap up. But our contributors today will share from their experience, their expertise, their insights, how we can address this long problematic of gender-based violence. And so it is my pleasure to invite Abishaj. Oh dear, I feel, please correct my pronunciation. It is a pleasure to have you, and I would like to invite you to please just introduce yourself briefly. Abishaj?
Hello, everyone. My name is Abishag Wawire. I'm from Uganda. I work with the Uganda Association of Women Lawyers, commonly known as FIDA Uganda, as a programs coordinator. And I have done a lot of work around GBV prevention, gender justice, especially with and for young women and men to advance gender justice and create violence-free societies for them. I am very excited to be here to learn from all of you and just to share my experiences from the field and work I have been doing for the past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abishag. I've got it right. It's a pleasure to have you. Oh, I'm just saying, colleagues, we're working with a first name basis because we're really having a close, intimate conversation about something that we want to commit to. So please allow me to apply that mode of operation as we talk with each other. And now I invite Cece to please introduce yourself.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be in this space. My name is Cecilia Saavedra. I belong to the Bolivian Network and work on masculinities. I'm a feminist. Today, it's dangerous to be a feminist or to consider yourself feminist in the public sphere. I am a woman who works on masculinities, and my biggest challenge is being a mom. I am the mom of 2 boys. And like you, Suan, I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation to share my expertise regarding the Latin American context, but I'm also very concerned about the current violent scenario at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Good to have you here. Yes, we celebrate our moments together, but lament the problematic. I am also happy to invite Chabelle to please introduce yourself briefly.
I don't see Charbel yet.
Is Chabelle with us?
Let me follow up.
Okay, I thought I had seen him in the room. That's okay. We will just move on to the other speaker, and when he comes in, he can introduce himself. Ravi, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. My name is Ravi Verma, and I work with the International Center for Research on Women based in New Delhi. This is an Asia region office. I come from a background of working on the issues of gender from a men and masculinity perspective. And within ICRW, we have been engaging on this particular issue of engaging men and discussing and talking about the issues of masculinities in different contexts, weaving it into different thematic areas, working within the communities and different institutional system. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ravi. Welcome, welcome. I know we're going to have a rich conversation once we have introduced our final panelist or our final discussant, Ruti.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this really interesting discussion, I hope. It's always nice to have spaces for learning. So my name is Ruti Levtov. I also come from a background in gender and men and masculinities, and now am an independent consultant and a senior associate at the Prevention Collaborative, where we really focus on the prevention of violence in the family. And my work has primarily been, I will say, in the offline space. And so opportunities to think about how the world is changing and how, some of the lessons that we have from thinking about offline spaces may or may not apply in this context. So really looking forward to talking with everyone and including everyone in the audience as well.
Thank you very much, Ruti. Indeed, we're going to see those connections between the offline and online and how some of these practices and how some of these approaches, in fact, coalesce and intercede. So at the beginning, we said definitely we're exploring misogyny as a problematic. We're exploring the impact, nature, and structure of the manosphere as a problematic. We're exploring GBV as it occurs across contexts, both offline and online. And we are looking at the impact on real people's lives across the spectrum of gender, sex, and sexuality. What I'm going to do, we have essentially 4 leading questions. You are welcome to, raise follow-up questions as they come to your mind. These questions may not be answerable at this point, as we know, but it will raise within our own mind a point for reflection. So we really want to encourage that as well. As we make statements, we also reflect through questioning. So the first question that I'm putting out for everyone to consider, and you can come together and share your views collectively, each person, within this current context that we live in, this context where we live strongly in the offline, online as interconnected, this new landscape of GBV, let's think of the landscape as expanded. How can we then expand our understanding conceptually, theoretically, etc., of GBV? That's part one of the question. We have an expanded context. How can we understand in an expanded way sexual and gender-based violence? And the second part of the question is, how can we effectively disrupt or address myths that say there's a separation between the public and private, that GBV and sexual violence and the forms of violence take place in certain contexts that don't match other contexts. So let's explore the context together. How can we expand and how can we disrupt the myths? Who would like to begin the conversation?
So let me just go first briefly.
Yes.
So from my experience, one thing that we need to realize and the notion that we need to understand is that the online and offline, it's just one continent. It's one whole big space that has emerged. Like the online space has come up. It's like a new playing field for violence to continue. So we need to realize that violence can never either start online and we see the effects happening physically with somebody, or it can begin offline and we see this escalating into the online space. So it's really just one space, and we need to remove that notion that the online realm is entirely different from what we are facing in the physical. And because you will see that most of the causes of violence, physical violence, are essentially the same as those of violence that we are seeing online. Things like patriarchy, misogyny, anonymity, things like that. These are the reasons somebody is going to use to think about when they're harming somebody physically, but also when they're doing this online, it's going to be the same driving force that they're having for them to post that nude picture, for them to share my private information online. Sometimes it's because I can, but also when they're beating somebody, when they're beating a man or beating somebody who does not conform to that that picture that we have of a man should be like this, a woman should be like this. If I'm harassing you, it's because you're not conforming to my standard, to the kind of power that I have. So I will harm you just because I can. And this we see it happening also in the online space. So we need to really acknowledge that the online space is just new playing ground for us to really harm people. And like there is nothing different when it comes to the physical. And then one thing that we need to also think about critically, the effects that it has, they're entirely the same. If I am a victim or survivor of sexual violence, I'm going to have the same effect, for example, on my psychology. I will face psychological impacts. Maybe I'll quit my job because I can't stand going to work. This is going to clearly be the same impact that we're going to have if I wake up in the morning and my nude pictures have been shared online, right? I will probably fear to go outside because I think everybody has seen my naked pictures. I can't show up to work the way I was showing up before because I have already lost my self-esteem, which is the same thing that we see when it comes to, I don't want to say physical, but like the physical harm. We need to move from that notion that violence is really what we see on our body. If I have been slapped, then there's a scar, which online, I will not have a scar from being slapped, but it's really having a scar on me psychologically. And that's something we cannot really shy away from. But again, the root causes, like I said, they are the same, but the impacts are entirely the same. There are not different impacts for online and offline. In my view, I actually think sometimes that the online, because we are still trying to understand it, but when you really dig deeper, it has more chilling effects because the reach, right? Here, maybe I may be beaten by my spouse, but here, the whole world, you're having 70 million people having access to the shame, the assault that I'm facing, and they're witnessing it. We have so many bystanders that are going to watch this kind of violence, share, retweet, like for their engagements. So all these people, 70 million people are really looking at the violence, they're watching the violence happen to me. Yet here it could be just me and my spouse, or me and my partner, or just a group of friends around me who witness it. And it's easier for me to like hide and maybe move on with my life. But online, remember, remains on we always say the internet never forgets. So even if I have moved on, it's easy for people to bring it up. I can give you an example. In Uganda, we had a famous musician sometime back, I think I was still in high school, when her nude pictures were released. She was a gospel artist. Up to now, she got married this month. And when she was getting married, somebody woke up and reshared her nude pictures. This is about 10 years later, you would have think, oh, we have moved on. But somebody brought it up, like, oh, this gospel artist, oh, these are her nude pictures. She's very flexible. She's like this. So you're bringing back that trauma that somebody has tried to forget, because like I said, the internet never forgets. It is always going to follow you wherever you go. Somebody will always bring it up, just maybe to cause harm, to cause shame, and ridicule you. Yes, so let me stop there for now. I
Yes,
give space to
indeed.
others.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, because you've done really well for this first part of the question to bring to the floor the motivations, the structures and belief systems, consequences, and impact to answer the question. So now I invite Cecilia, Ruti, or Ravi to jump in. And I like the Ugandan example. Yes, do share examples from your space as well, so we could see how we share reality together. Thank you so much, Abhishek. Colleagues, we spoke about motivation, structures, consequences, and impact. How do we define GBV in these interconnected contexts?
I mean, just to add quickly to what Abhishek was saying, I think it's useful to think about a continuum, but also all the interrelationships between different kinds of violence. So again, not working so much in the online violence. When I look at all the different forms that have been identified, you're talking about everything from, a known person, a partner, let's say sharing a nude picture, and again, all the impacts that has, to inciting political violence and violence against particular, women leaders or things like that, right? So you're talking about a really wide range. I think similarly, when we're talking about GBV offline, you're talking about a really wide range, from violence in the home to trafficking to all sorts of things. But I think the evidence has been pretty clear about all of the interconnections between these things. So everything from the interconnections between intimate partner violence and violence in the children against children in the same home, and the sort of intergenerational aspects of that, as well as, impacts of kind of stress and conflict violence that's happening outside of the home, and how related that is to increases in violence inside of the home. So I think all of these connections are there, and sort of behoove us to stop trying to separate them. At the same time, while many of the drivers and many of the consequences are similar, there are, for every type of violence, there's some specificities. And I think, Avishag, you were mentioning it exactly correctly, that, like, when I was a teenager, if a nude photo of me had gotten out, it's far different than if it's happening now, and the entire internet could have access to that, and it never goes away, and I can never get rid of it. Although I have been seeing some, options for remedies and things like that, and groups that are trying to help people remove kind of those sort of things online. But just to say, I think there are some specificities. And so, at the same time, while we keep the big picture and learn from things we already know, there's specificities we need to focus on and figure out. And I'll stop there.
Indeed, Ruti, yes, the interconnections, the scope of how violence may manifest, and then the specificities in context that we must address specifically. Cecilia.
Y bueno, agradecer la oportunidad,
Okay.
¿no? A la red MenEngage Latinoamérica.
Thank you so much for this
poder estar en
opportunity,
este espacio.
MenEngage Latin America, for this
Aquí más
space.
hablamos de lo que es la violencia machista. No sé si hay
Here,
una
mostly
traducción
we
al
speak
inglés,
about
de lo que
man's
es
violence. I don't know if
violencia
there's
de
a
género,
specific
como que se
name for
esencializa
it in
la
English,
violencia
but
del
it's
hombre hacia la
gender
mujer, ¿no?
violence, the
En
violence
cambio,
of
la
man
violencia
towards a
machista muestra
woman.
esta expresión dura
This
de poder,
hard
¿no?
expression
sobre
of
las
male
otras
power
personas.
over
Normalmente es
other
desde
people,
los hombres
over
hacia otros
women.
hombres vistos,
Also,
digamos, de
violence
distinta manera,
of
que no cumplen
men
con este
towards
modelo
other men
hegemónico de
that don't
masculinidad,
meet the
y
male
hacia las otras
stereotype.
mujeres, el
And
hombre que ve
also
a las otras
violence
personas
towards
como
women,
inferiores, ¿no?
a
Entonces,
man
es
that
una
sees
relación de poder
other
muy vertical.
people as
Y en
inferior.
cuanto a este contexto de esta
And within
violencia,
this context of violence,
hasta hace poco, y todavía se ve que la violencia privada
we can
es el que
still
tenemos
see
una
that
ley
domestic
específica,
violence,
pero la
private
violencia privada
violence,
no nos metemos en este espacio porque es
means
privado.
that
Entonces es muy
we cannot
peligroso,
enter
¿verdad?
that space
Porque
because it's a private
en tierras
space.
como
So it's
Chávez,
truly dangerous
no
because
llega a
in
haber justicia, no
certain
llega a haber la
communities,
violencia.
you
Si
can't
mató a su pareja,
you
es
can't
porque era
fight for
justicia, ¿no?
justice because there is
Entonces,
no claim filed against that
estamos
person. Maybe a
todavía
man
vibrantes, ¿no?
that killed
Tratando de
his
llegar
wife, and we
a
cannot
estos
intervene.
espacios,
And
pero
we
hay
are
una
working
ley
very
aquí en
hard to
Honduras,
try
la ley
and reach these
348, que
spaces.
garantiza
We
a las
have a
mujeres, por
regulation
ejemplo, la
here
ley
in
de
Brazil,
violencia
348,
privada,
that guarantees
pero
women the
ayer
right to a life
justamente
without
había una
violence.
marcha en contra
But
de esta
just
ley.
yesterday, there was a
Y
strike
hay una
against
preocupación
this
grande porque
act, against
cuando
this
ya
rule,
tenemos
and there's a
gobiernos
lot
del
of
ala de la
concern
derecha, gobiernos,
because
un
we
gobierno
have
conservador
a
español que dio la vuelta
right-wing
el 19 de octubre,
administration in power
dos
and
gobiernos,
seeking
o
a
sea, dos
second
partidos de
term
derecha,
in
¿no?
October.
Y
And
tenemos
so
como que estamos alertas a los retrocesos,
we
porque
are
ya
very
dijo este
cautious
presidente
because we're having a
diciendo
lot of
que esta ley
setback.
castiga a los
It's
hombres
saying that this
sin
regulation is
nada de
anti-male, it
juicio,
punishes men,
y no se está viendo toda esta ley, esta violencia
and we are
brutal,
seeing
¿no? Que estamos
this
sufriendo, esta
brutal
violencia.
violence
Yo hablo también desde la experiencia.
in
Me
the home,
considero una
from a
feminista
male
de
to the
calle,
woman. I
porque soy
consider
de las
myself a
calles, porque soy
street
visible, me
feminist
adelantó nuestra
because I
lucha por
participate in
justicia,
many different
ciudadanos,
spaces where we
policía,
demand
¿no?
justice, we're
Exigimos
present
justicia.
in
Los
courtrooms,
casos son muy
in police stations, demanding justice. And I also support mothers that have lost their children to violence. It's violence of one man towards a child. And we don't speak of this violence. We are not reflecting on this violence. We have no data from CISTAC, the organization where I work. We're opening up an observatory on work on masculinity where we want to gather data. What happens to these men that are violent towards other men or towards kids? And these are mothers that are seeking justice for their own children. It's not just a number. And it's something that is
Diferente a explorar hoy en día que
ordinary.
no
It's
sabemos qué
something
está
that we need
pasando con
to
los
explore.
adolescentes
We
en
don't know
este
what's
mundo virtual.
happening with the youth in this virtual online world.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Cecilia. I think you do well to bring us to two big things that build on what Abhishek and Ruti said, which is our policy, legislative, regulatory, political framework, and the willpower that goes behind that, as well as understanding perpetrators, but also unpacking who those perpetrators are and how they perpetrate, and how that is done differently in different contexts, both offline, online, but in terms of cultural context, what happens in that space. So we're seeing the themes. Remember, we're trying to establish how we understand gender-based violence in the contemporary. We're seeing the emerging themes that continue to be relevant. And I want to turn to Ravi to share your view.
Well, thank you. I endorse everything that has been said by my previous speakers. From the experience of the work that we have been doing on gender-based violence prevention and with men and masculinities, few things are very clear. One, that there is a very little research and there is very little information as to how to consistently use the terminologies and definitions and measurements on technology facilitated gender-based violence. And that creates sort of hinders, accurate understanding of how do we address this. So I'm very happy that in this first session, we are trying to deconstruct or trying to construct the understanding of the gender-based violence through technology facilitated platforms and reach some kind of a common understanding. but we must recognize that we need much more deeper and consistent research in this. We need to, most researchers, most programs are focused on victim support rather than prevention, and therefore that's a clear, kind of a shortcoming. In humanitarian context, especially, there's a complete lack of safety tools, and there's a huge stigma. The digital literacy further suppresses any kind of help seeking. Therefore, we don't understand what's happening out there. So there are special situations that would define and help us understand the technology facilitated gender-based violence. I'm using the TFGVV more than online violence because I think technology, there are many terms, but I suppose technology facilitated GBV allows us to look at many different kinds of platforms and many different usage which are intersectionally used, and gives us a better understanding of the mechanism of, and also allows us to look at many different forms of GBV. So, and in that context, I really want to underscore one fact that while I completely agree, and there cannot be two opinions that online, offline is a continuum and do feed onto each other, but we need a little more clear, focused understanding of what is this online or the technology facilitated GBV is, what are the specific context within which they happen, what are the specific motivations for which they happen, who, what are the different behaviors and tactics that are used. So, for example, we can't use just one term to define the GBV on these platforms as stalking, harassment, doxing, hacking, fake accounts, image building. So each one of them have a slightly different meanings, have different implications, have different drivers, and therefore we need to understand those nuances. So, and then the modes and frequency of this, the impacts everyone has talked about. There has to be a greater understanding of how they link, and especially help-seeking behavior. Survivors' response on this is critical in our understanding of the complete spectrum of online or technology facilitated GBV. So I have seen in recent times the work that we are doing with the young men on these issues offline. A lot of the conversations during those during those sessions are woven around how young men use online misogynistic messages to push us back. So a lot of backlash arguments. Working with men and boys offline on these issues has become far more challenging and far more, perhaps creative. We need to be much more creative because they already have a counter argument, a counter narrative, a fake narrative, and a fake image that they would throw it within the group and circles to create their own, network around those issues. So working on these issues with young men and issues of masculinities also goes through a process where we see a counter narrative and narrative being built in the same spaces with equal rigor and violence and aggression, and therefore it is often it's often requires a very different kind of treatment to these interventions, and I think my sense is that conceptual clarity on the technology facilitated GBV is so critical in addressing these issues within the offline interventions, because we could take those examples and go through in deconstructing as to where is it coming from, where the cultural elements, what are the religious, social, legal, and technological factors that are enhancing that particular, defining the larger context, and what could be the motivation for doing this. And then you begin to see how conversations moves from a macro narrative to a very micro kind of interventions, approaches on this. So I think we have a work to do. We have a lot to understand as to how some of these things, some of these violences are manifesting in different contexts, and try and figure out specific responses, and then build insights for a larger generalizations of those information. So it's very important that we really focus on the technology facilitated GBVs and its manifestations, its natures, and its context, and develop a framework and agree on those frameworks. So, yeah, I'll just
Indeed.
stop here. Yeah.
Indeed, Ravi, yes. And I'm just going to allow Ruti to just respond, and then we wrap up this question and move to the next one. Ruti?
Yeah, just very quickly, I wanted to reinforce one of the things that Ravi said about how much sort of the changes in kind of the technology also affect the work that we do for not technology facilitated violence, right? So offline work. So again, really keen to hear more about issues that people are having with recruitment of folks, with the way that people are talking about things, with the way that we need to connect with young men and women and others as we're doing our kind of work like we used to.
Yes, as we continue our, our advocacy, our scholarship, our research, as we were saying, and our activism. So this question, colleagues, you've done really well to clarify for us within this landscape of the offline, online, private, public, and all that is mapped onto that. We must account for the motivations that are shared and that are different, the structures that continue to manifest across contexts, the specificities, as well as the interconnectedness, the generalizations. We must account for our policy legislative framework. We need to unpack those who are impacted upon, who are acted upon, and those who perpetrate upon others, as Cecilia was saying. We need to look at how people seek help, how people manifest violence. And one takeaway from this first question, based on all that you have said, is that violence has broadened, but violence borrows from these principles and notions of gender and gender relations, or the social and power relations of gender, that make it complicating our action, which is the last point that Ruti said. Just for all of our people who have joined with us, when we understand misogyny, it's always good to be clear on our concepts. We talk about dislike, we talk about contempt, we talked about ingrained prejudice. Misogyny addresses that prejudice, that dislike, that contempt against women and girls, but extends beyond the sex body to feminine, gender non-conforming, and anything that is outside of the status quo. So textbook definition of misogyny will relate to women and girls, right? But I want us to understand, as we have established to our speakers, that misogyny then becomes an expanded concept in the contemporary. And then in your invitation, you would have seen the manosphere then becomes the space online that Ravi was saying we have to explore. How are we going to address these violences, to use the plural there? It becomes this space, this collection of online or technology-facilitated spaces that we see misogyny and other forms of violence practiced. I really like that concept, Ravi, technology-facilitated GBV. So we could understand that it's not so much a form that is the context, but it is facilitated by context. And one more thing before we take the next question, I just wanted to cite what people said in the chat to give each other a conversation and a space. Yasmin said, most people don't believe online violence is real violence. Joni said, the pyramid of violence is helpful here to show the interconnections of various forms of violence, from psychological, verbal to physical. Yasmin also added that online violence like cyber harassment and stalking also has the potential or often moves on to physical realm. So that interconnectedness that Ruti and Abhishek had spoken about earlier. And then, of course, we have Alan talking about other specificities, which you all have also made relevant. And as we go on, I'll keep referring to the chat to bring our audience in. Colleagues, next question. So we ended with impact from Ruti and Ravi, and of course our other colleagues had said it before, how does it impact our work and how does this impact our understanding? I have a specific question for you now. How does violence, gender-based violence, of course, violence against someone based on their existence as gendered, their roles, their responsibilities, their expressions, their relations, right? All of those things that are gendered. How does this violence impact men and boys, particularly, and create a vicious cycle of violence? So what's the impact on men and boys who are often cited as perpetrators, but whose lives are often implicated in violence, impact? And how does it create a vicious cycle? And how does all of this sustain misogyny and dominance, which we can, of course, have you act it, you express it, you symbolize it. So let me repeat the question. How does the violence we are trying to understand and reconceptualize impact the lives of men and boys and create a vicious cycle that sustains misogyny and dominance and inequities and injustices? Over to you. Let's change the order around. And why don't we start with Cecilia this time? Did I put you on the spot?
Gracias. Gracias, Suan.
Thanks, Suan.
Esta
Yes, of course.
violencia sabemos que es un aprendizaje
This
tanto para,
violence
en
is
los
a
hombres desde
learning
niños, ¿no?
experience
En muchos
for men
contextos,
since they are
es
boys.
como se enseña, ¿no? Si un
In many
compañero,
contexts,
digamos, te
they
molesta
are
o sufres
taught
violencia
this.
en la
If
escuela,
someone
el entorno mismo te dice
disturbs
que te
you,
defiendas.
the
No te da
context
otra
or
forma de
the other people
resolución de
tell you to
conflicto.
defend yourself.
Y
That's
creo
the only
que
way
desde
conflicts
niños están
should
bajo
be
mucha
solved.
presión.
So
Este
men,
mandato
since
tan
they are
fuerte de no
boys, they are
llorar,
under so much
¿no?
pressure. There
De
is
como
this
hombre no
strong
puedes
mandate
llorar, no
about
puedes
boys don't
expresar tus
cry.
emociones,
You cannot
o
express
este
your
mandato de que
feelings,
tienes que ser
or
fuerte,
this mandate that you
que
need to
tienes que
be
mostrarte, ¿no?
strong,
Fuerte,
that you need to show yourself as
es
someone
algo
that is
que va
very
afectando,
strong.
¿no? A lo largo.
That's
Que hemos
something that
visto en varios espacios, varios
affects us
talleres que
over
damos
time in
algunos
several
centros
worships that
que
we
demuestran, tienen que
organize.
demostrar, ¿no? Y
We see
las
that
peleas, el bullying,
teenagers
están estos desafíos.
have to
Y en
stay
línea
strong
también, ¿no?
in spite of the challenges, whether bullying or any other challenge. And this also applies to the digital world. When you are minimized, when you are seen as a lesser man. So we have the challenge of not making men victims. We need to create tools. And these spaces in which we work with teenagers, men and women, tell us that sexism is no longer a problem, that there is more gender equality. That's what they are seeing. But this is not based on values. But then we have more violent practices, even among young women. Young women are more violent against each other. And this action of tagging everyone on social media. As Ravi said, we are discovering this world. Sometimes it seems out of scope. We believe that our children are safe at home. What are they doing in their rooms while they are surfing the web? We know that there is a huge level of pornography consumption and violent pornography consumption. That's a way in which they are learning about sexuality, and that's a way that they engage with their partners. So there are so many things to be explored, and that's a way of reinforcing misogyny, because we consider the other as less important. And if you are compared with others, and if you cry as a girl, that's considered an insult. We are not seeing the others as equals. And in men's spaces, there is also this concept of humiliation. humiliation as a way to reaffirming masculinity. And that's a very important mandate within masculinity. And we are identifying unequal power relations. These unequal power relations tell you that you are less of a man, or share those messages, or maybe you are gay, for example. If you are less of a man, you are compared to others, or you are compared to a woman or to a gay person. And that's an impact that affects men along their lives. And that's why these spaces such as the manosphere are created, so that they can empower you. We need to reaffirm traditional masculinity. You cannot be dominated by a woman. You are the one that should be dominating. You have to be strong. You have to leave your house at 18. You have to create your own life. That's okay, but this is within the context of sexism, that you need to be respected, that you have to control. There are so many mandates that are imposed on men. There are many influencers that share those mandates. For example, here in Latin America, that's the case. They share mandates. They are anti-feminist mandates. We know that feminism reivindicates equality and rights, but these influencers attack or conduct hate attacks against feminism. So I think that there is a lot to be done. It's a great opportunity to listen to each other at a global level, how we are experiencing this online phenomenon. If we dig deeper, we will see that this has a great impact
te
on
dan un
people,
like,
because if you are
es
not
lo peor
validated,
que te
if you
puede
are not
pasar.
liked, that's the worst thing that might happen to you.
Gracias, Juan.
Thanks, Suan.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for really drawing for all of us how this impacts the very existence of men and boys, the way they express themselves, the way their identity can be formed, the way that they can earn social capital, and how knowledge becomes a site of conflict and violence in itself. Let me invite Abhishek, of course, to share your view. What's the impact?
Thank you. So, the impact of violence on men, there are very many, but with the work that we do, they are often ignored because one, men do not show up in that sense, right? We usually have an exercise called the gender box when we are conducting our work and outreach in the community, and you ask people to describe what it means to be a man, who is a man, what it means to be a woman, and more often than not, most of these descriptions are physical attributes, right? Like we have limited the description of masculinity. It's very narrow, but it's only in line with most of our physical attributes. A man is supposed to be strong, and if you're strong, you're the provider. A man, things like that, right? So if you are not showing up like this, then you're not a man, right? So you're also going to face violence. I don't know if that makes sense, right? So if you choose to step out of the box, if I am not physically strong, then I'm a weak man, right? And if you're a weak man, you're going to face violence, because how dare you not be strong? This is what we imagine a man should be. A man should show up in society. There's that provider effect, that men are providers. So if a man is not providing, then he's not a man, that's a woman. What does that mean? So people, for example, in the LGBTQ plus community, already you're outside that norm, right? Maybe you're feminine, you show up as a feminine person, right? That's how you want to show up as. You're not representing a typical man. Let me use that word, what a typical man should look like. So even if a man is facing violence, we have been told men do not cry, right? So if I'm facing violence, if a woman is mistreating me, more often than not, these cases happen. Like you find that a man is coming to open up to you that, you know what, maybe my wife beat me, my spouse is harming me, I'm facing this kind of violence at home. You find that most of our fashion is like, how? But to a man, right? Like, how dare you let a woman step over you and treat you that way? Because we don't expect that to happen to a man. So what does that mean? That they're not going to open up, they're not going to be free, because you're going to judge them because they do not conform to that idea that we have that a man should present as. I don't know if that makes sense. So more so, having power, because we have told men they have the power. And society, especially in my country, in my community, Uganda, a strong man is liked. If you have power, you're really liked, you're respected, right? So even when you're handling conflict, it's the strongest man win, right? So they will always show up with violence. So even if you want to come and maybe sit down, talk about the issue, it won't make sense, because I need to show my power. I'm the boss of this area. I need to show my power. I need to beat my wife to put her in line. It's so funny. Just today I was reading a social media post of a lady who was saying, oh, I met this man, and when we were talking, he asked me, oh, so if I ask you to jump, will you jump? And then she's like, no. Then he's like, oh no, but that means you cannot conform to power and leadership, so I cannot be with you and all that. And she's like, well, I'm going to jump him after, because I can't. So you can imagine. So that is how they're showing up. Yet you could have asked me like, oh, maybe do you want to be submissive? Is it a must? Have like a proper, meaningful conversation. But for him in his head, you have to show up as a submissive person, whether you want to or not. So whoever is seen lesser than that, obviously they're going to trample over you. And you cannot come and open up freely when you're facing violence. So you find that most men are silent. You find that in my country, suicide rates among men are really high because they have nobody to talk to. And when you try to have these conversations with them, the so-called masculine men will be like, you're trying to spoil our men. Last year we ran a Be Men campaign, and we're trying to expand the definition of masculinity, that, hey, men also have emotions, men can cry, it's okay to break down, you don't always have to be a provider, sometimes talk it out. And some of the feedback we'll get, oh, these feminists, they have come, now they're spoiling men, they don't want men to show up, they want weak men, what, it's bad society, ban them. I mean, that's the feedback we are getting. So now imagine if it's a man having these conversations with fellow men. So fellow men will not even hear them out. But again, also women, we have been conditioned to look out for physical attributes from a man. That's what is cool, that is what is fancy. That when you find someone who is showing up differently, you will question, you'll be like, that's not normal. That's not normal. Yet ideally, people need to be free to show up how they want to represent themselves however they want to. Even if I'm a man, I can choose to want to wear a skirt, I can choose to show up in a feminine way, and that should be okay. But society has said that is not okay. And when you show up the other way around, of course, you're going to be a victim of violence. And they are not going to talk about that because it escalates the violence that you're already facing. Imagine you go to a police station, you're facing GBV at home, you're a man, and you're going to a police station to report a case of GBV. First of all, you're going to find that all the people who handle GBV cases are women. So a man, you're coming and you're saying, oh, my wife beat me. Trust me, they will laugh at you. Because we see this happening, the policeman will laugh at you. Oh, this is not a strong man. How can this woman beat him, like go back home and beat her? So they're encouraging that violence to keep happening. Yet he has come to report this is a serious issue. We keep on saying GBV happens to both men, women, persons with disabilities, in whatever form somebody chooses to identify as, they can face GBV. But for them, it's only, in their view, only a woman should come and report GBV. Even if you are a man and you have a disability, you cannot go and report. Yet already you're disadvantaged. You have a challenge that you're dealing with that is heightening the violence that you're facing. But you can't come and report because men don't have these conversations. How dare you have such a conversation? Exactly. How dare you can remove personal issues and bring them to the public realm for us to discuss that? So it becomes a bit challenging, but you see that men are suffering in silence, for lack of a better word. They're really suffering in silence. And unless we encourage them to speak up, but when we encourage them to speak up and we actually listen to them and provide solutions for them, for those who speak up, not encouraging them to speak up and we laugh at them, which happens more often than not, we're not going to see anything happening differently. And the cycle is going to keep continuing, going on, and nothing will change. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for continuing that conversation, not only of power relations, but of the pressure of conformity and the disciplinary mechanisms that exist in society. Ruti, Ravi, which one going next? Ravi, I think you've been nominated.
Okay. Thanks, Ruti. Thanks, Sue. So we have been working with with very young boys from 8 to 10 years old onwards. And just to answer your question, I was reflecting, um, the impact is just not unidirectional. It's not about something is being beamed on the young boy's mind and it is creating some kind of images. A lot of it is selective, self-selection. We have seen from 8, 10, 9, 11, 12-year-old kids, boys, they begin to access internet and other technological platforms that suits them in one or the other ways to seek violence. Now, this is where we need research. So it's very interesting that the boys coming from violent families where they've experienced and witnessed violence in and around them, whether their fathers are beating their mothers or where they're seen violence within their communities all the time, they access the platforms from that time onwards to find a justification. First to find a reason and then justifications. And that's where in a very interesting and convoluted manner, the peers and the larger expectations from boys begin to feed into this self-selection process of what they are accessing. So if we have to look at this whole entire issue of impact, we must disaggregate it by at what age one is accessing what kind of platforms and messaging and for what reasons, and what is the kind of then impact is we need to understand. A lot of the time we have seen that the impact is not uniform or universal to create a monolithic regression of the ideas of masculinity. Many boys and many young boys have used these platforms to challenge and counter or become distressed. In fact, the impact on them is traumatic because they don't agree with those. So a lot of mental health issues that we are seeing among the adolescents is essentially because they are conflicted. They're torn between what they see and what they disagree with and have no ways to get out of it. So I think that there needs to be an element of empathy in trying to understand this entire dynamics of who is creating. And I saw some of the chats how commercialization promotes certain kinds of platform usage, but it may not necessarily mean that everyone is consuming those. They may be there we have lots of millions of men on Andrew Tate's platform, but it doesn't mean that all of them are endorsing that. I mean, a lot of these men and boys are in their own ways talking about it and challenging it in their own. I mean, I'm talking from a very personal standpoint of working with men and boys where we have had debates on these issues. And I think their access to these platforms has a cathartic implication as well. I'm just taking the other side. A lot of these boys and men, when they see some of these images with which they see that these are distorted, fake, and created, they begin to question them. They begin to question because they are not dumb, slates where you just write everything as it is. They're questioning and they're seeking their own network, their own support system. So there is a flip side to the story of all this, and I see a lot of opportunities in this mess where a lot of sparks and new ideas and innovations and creativity is also emerging through online exposure and digital platforms. And that creativity allows them to question some of these violence issues because it comes in the way of their growth and creativity. So the engaging with men and masculinity issues has to be constantly balanced by the fact that by the knowledge or information that many of these boys and men are also challenging in their own ways, but they have no ways to, or very little expressions on that. So I would just stop here, but I really think that while the negative impact and adverse impact is clear, and we all know there's a huge and massive out there, but the moment you begin to connect it to the offline interactions, you begin to see the stories which are so hopeful and which are so powerful, and it's moving in many times, because you find the self-inflicted pains of many men and boys who are not in agreement with this, but have no appropriate ways out of this. So I'll just stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. You build so well on Abhishek's thought about listening and bringing that concept of empathy, the possibility for men and boys to resist through their own actions and to take things and understandings in their own hand, and that degree of dissonance, that degree of disagreement, contemplation that occurs within the cohort of men. As we proceed through our session, our conversation is so rich, we just have to be a little bit more crisp in our responses as time goes. But for this last question, I'm going to turn to Ruti to respond, and then we're going to move to the other question and just be a little bit more poncy so that we can make the most of time. Ruti?
Sure, I'll try to be very, very, very brief and also sort of build on what people have been saying. I'm struggling a little bit to figure out how to make this connection, but it's a point that I think is really important, which is one, like others have mentioned, like the sort of the influence of experiencing or witnessing violence, especially violence between parents as a child. I think we cannot sort of estimate the impact of that. That impact is both a social learning, right? You're learning what to do, but it also has impacts kind of physiologically on brain development, on trauma, on the way that then as adults we are able to self-regulate, to kind of manage our emotions, things like that. So this isn't deterministic. It's a risk factor. It's an increased risk. And to think about violence, so of course here we're emphasizing the kind of gender and misogyny as an important kind of risk factor or driver of violence. And that is of course true, but there's lots of other risk factors, many of which are also gendered, right? Have, things like alcohol use, things like mental health, things like poverty, that we need to be thinking about, if we're thinking about a response, how to bring those in as well. And so that's why, just very briefly, some of the things that, and again, I don't know that this works so much in technology facilitated violence, but I have seen some of the folks writing about the manosphere highlighting this, opportunities for care, for connection, for building, like Ravi said, empathy, relationship skills. The more we live online and don't have those kinds of relationships, and we see a lot of research in certain countries of men really having very few in-person interactions, that's something that, in the way that we think about it, maybe not just thinking about interventions that work specifically to prevent violence, but interventions that build on this whole kind of ecosystem of risk factors.
Indeed, Ruti, yes. And that ending point on our interventions and the form of those interventions, and of course, building communities and networks for engagement, empathetic, inclusive engagement around men and boys and other relationships, I'm sure. And then, of course, how do we contend with that? Takes us to the next question. And I'm seeing all of your wonderful comments in the chat, most valuable. But I'm going to take the next question, ask respondents to respond crisply. And we have one more, and then we will hear more from the larger audience. So the next question, colleagues, considering that we've already started to think about our interventions and our updating our approach or redesigning our approach or even continuing our approach, How does an intersectional approach, in particular to transformative action, that is inclusive of exploring men and masculinities as a core, our central category of analysis, how does applying that lens to our approach expand our understanding and our response to GBV? So an intersectional approach to transformation that is inclusive of men and masculinities, how does it expand our responsiveness and our understanding of GBV? So I open the floor to you all. Oh, sorry. Let's start with Rafi. Why not?
Okay. So, Ruti, oh, sorry, you were going. Okay, I thought you said Ravi. Yeah, my immediate short response is that in multi layered and structured societies that we live in, which are classified, stratified on the lines of caste and class and color, and especially ethnicities, intersectional lens is the way forward, because that provides us a, a kind of a seamless entry point to bring these conversations with the young men, because the online abuse is not only specific to men and women, but it's about all other forms of diversities. The idea of online abuse or online bullying and online, it's creating a narrative of monolithic kind of a narrative where there's always othering of one or the other kinds of people, and it's very it becomes far more easy to bring in those conversations when you have groups of young men and boys coming from different backgrounds and trying to have a conversation around gender-based, which is initially binary in nature and then soon expands into the all other kinds of diverse backgrounds, and then they begin to reconnect and see the reasons for questioning gender as a common denominator or the lowest denominator where every other forms of abuse and discriminations are built on, and therefore I think we find it extremely this is the only way to talk about. I think there's no other way that we could segregate men versus women kind of dimensions in these conversations. It has to be a larger conversation of diverse kind of discriminations that are happening, and how does that intersects with the gender-based violence. So yes, I think
Indeed, Ravi. Yeah, I agree with you. We live beyond the binary, and life manifests beyond these single monolithic explanations. So intersectionality then becomes our point of entry. Ruti, your microphone was on.
Oh, sorry, but I just very briefly, I mean, I think the importance of being really contextually specific in both understanding the problem, especially something like technology facilitated GBV that is, probably technology will affect us all eventually, hopefully GBV no, but the in contexts where there's not as much, context where there is, context where it's emerging. So basically the importance of just being really contextually specific in understanding the problem and thinking of the solutions. And I'll stop there.
Indeed, from that context helps us build, as we say, across all of, well, I also identify as feminist, definitely. Grounded notions of who we are and what we do is so important. Up next, I invite either Cecilia or Abhishek to join this. Just a briefer comment about the approach we can take. Cecilia, you want to? I see your mic is open.
Yes, thank you. So I think it's important to see this on a macro, on a structural level. We work with people, we work in different workshops, but this is our biggest enemy, right? So from this intersectional approach, I think that we could reach a more transformative action to include men, masculinities, which would be a central role that would help us understand violence, but from this complex phenomenon of the oppression systems. Which are the oppression systems? It's patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, which is very present here in Latin America because we've been colonized. And so it's truly present here. Racism as well. There are so many spaces, so many oppression systems. Homophobia is also another form of oppression, and this economic inequality. So I think that all of this intersectional analysis would enable us to work better and from a more transformative action, and not just focus. I think it's been a mistake to just focus on empowering women. We've empowered women, but we haven't worked on these other spaces, which are men, masculinities. And so we are seeing a lot of setbacks due to failure to work with these other spaces. So it's important to see how these different masculinities can articulate, can sometimes oppress each other through these relationships of power, and how this reproduces even more violence. How one way or another violence is constantly being reproduced. And from this analysis, to try to stop justifying violence. There's no justification for violence. We need to stop making violence natural. This concept that man needs to be strong, we need to cut that from the root. And from this approach, try to reach the population. Here in Latin America, we have a lot of different spaces that practically have no virtual space. Some people have very remote access where you can only access through boats. So they don't have access to technology. So how do we access these remote locations? We know that languages, translation opens door. We're trying to do a series of podcasts to try to reach these people in their own native tongues. And we think that these are strategies that are going to allow us to reach these remote spaces, which we believe will be transformative. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Abhishek.
Very briefly, because I feel like everything has been said, but for my take on intersectionality is that it really helps us to shift from that notion of men are perpetrators and the abusers, women are the victims and disabilities are the ones who suffer the actions of men, to really question the system. Why do these people behave the way they do? Instead of categorizing all men are the same, we shall go down and begin questioning. Look at cultures, norms, religion. People don't like when you talk about religion and ask them to question that religion, because these are some of the factors that help us understand. Because when we understand that not all men have the same relationship with power and money, economics, it will be easier for us to work with them. So you know how to approach them to cause change, because you understand that different economic standings, there are different when it comes to power, but because you also know what is forcing them, because we really cannot change what we don't understand. And to understand that, we need to ask the questions of what is causing people to act the way they are acting, and what can we do to change that. Briefly, that's it from me.
Indeed, indeed. Colleagues, and I think you have, in fact, done a natural segue into the final question, which was asking about how, with the rise of violence, how can we expand our understanding of the spectrum of intersections? But I think the answer to question 1, 2, and this late, we expanded specificity. We said that it was a range, and intersectionality is bringing different entry points and different perspectives. So I want to turn over to expand to the community here to join in the conversation, either through questions or commentary, to share with us. Lakshman just confirming that we have 15 more minutes together. 15, right. So in our last 15 minutes, I invite you all here. Thank you all so much for coming. We have a nice big audience. Thank you for your comments in the chat. Very informative, very insightful as well. I think we're speaking to each other on a good entry point. Any questions, any comments that you would like to share? Your own assertions to the questions we've been asking. I'm not seeing the hands, but I will try to look for your hand. Otherwise, you can put your microphone on. While I wait for you to put your hand up, I'll read some of the comments in the chat. Yes, I hear somebody.
We have Yasmin.
Yasmin, please, go ahead. Yeah. Yasmin? I'm not, Yasmin, are you there? Maybe there's a little challenge with the microphone. Now, I know Yasmin had put some very interesting and insightful comments in the chat. Yasmin, if you can get your, comment just so we can find out what's affecting you from speaking. While we wait on Yasmin, anybody else who would like to share or question for our panelists? I think I'm not seeing any at this point. Okay, so as we wait to see if anybody else has any comments, I just wanted to bring our larger audience into the conversation. We do have, I'm going to go from bottom straight up to share with you. Ruti, well, this is from Ruti. Sorry, Ruti, you've been chatting with us. From Dhruv Kumar, I think transforming model that works on intersectionality, this is in relation to our last question, must have a gender lens of equity and ownership. Yes, so young boys can think and rethink on different perspectives of human dignity. And we have a respondent saying, I think that is the context within which intersectionality is defined and observed. So we have this idea of really and truly accounting for ownership of these approaches. I think that's a really good comment there. We have a comment from Jan. Do we have someone who wants to contribute?
It's actually Yasmin. I managed to fix my microphone. Sorry, I was having an issue with it. Thank you so much for having this conversation. For me, I feel that it's a different conversation as a person who has been part of online outtake facilitated GPV conversations. It's very rare to hear people have a conversation about the manosphere and how male behavior is affecting TF GPV. So for me, this is a very, very interesting conversation. And some of the speakers have said earlier, I feel like it's important to stress things like data. We lack the necessary data, disaggregated data when it comes to something like this, because if we are going to use, if we're going to change mindsets, if we're going to, teach people how the fact that their actions have consequences online, or that toxic masculinity affects their perceptions, it affects their actions, and all of these things. We need the actual data about what is making people behave the way they are, and to what extent is it affecting them, and how can we what ways can we do mindset change. We cannot just walk into this field and randomly carry out mindset change drives, because if you do not understand what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with, and the surrounding environment, even if you came out and did a mindset change training, you're not going to get anywhere, because you will not be affecting those people. They are still going to leave that training, go back to their environments, and be reinvigorated to redo the same things you're trying to get them to stop doing. So I feel like it cannot be trivialized how important data is, especially in this field. tech-facilitated gender-based violence is something that is still picking up and people are still learning about. And because of that, people have not truly, put in a lot of effort when it comes to, collecting all this data or even just impact assessments. Where some of us have done projects or, of, TFGBV awareness or, consequence, information, all these things, but there is no impact assessments that have been done, or even if they have been done, they have not been shared. How effective have these solutions been? How, what needs to be changed? What needs to be tweaked? You understand? So I feel that these are very, very important things, especially when you're looking at behavior change and the manosphere, because when you're dealing with male behavior, you cannot truly assume that this is a generalized idea of what male people think or how the male people behave, or this is how they should behave. Different people actually think differently regardless of their gender. And if you think about it that way, you realize that it is important to go down to actually understand these different people and the different cultural aspects that, build them into who they are and the actions that they do. Of course, because these are the things that affect their behavior online, offline. So yeah, I feel that it's very, very important to have the conversation and mostly involve men in these spaces. You go to an NGO space where they're talking about online gender-based violence and there's no men in the room. So it's important to invite them to these spaces because I feel like they also don't understand what we as women think, which also creates, misinformation and mistrust, because there's this perception that feminists are out to get men. We're not out to get men. That's not what we are here for. We're trying to make safer spaces, for everyone. So if we invited them more to our spaces, they would understand feminism more, and they would be able to also champion some of the things that we're trying to put out there. Yeah, thank you.
I was unmuted. A core theme, thank you very much, Yasmin. A core theme from our conversation, as Ravi had raised earlier on, is having that research, that data, and following up so that we can understand. This first segment of the three-part series is about understanding how we conceptualize and how we respond. Colleagues, there are some questions in the chat as well. We have about 5 minutes, but I do want to say it so you can reflect. And if in your final words to wrap up the sentence, you might share your thoughts on them. One of the questions comes from Lucy, who says, what strategies do you suggest from your experience to attract men to attend workshops? So that builds really well on what Yasmin just said. So one, what strategies do you suggest from your experience to attract men to attend workshops? And then I saw another question from Fernando, who says, in your opinion, what kind of evidence is most urgently needed to improve interventions against tech-facilitated GBV in particular? So that, of course, also builds on the comments from Yasmin. So let's take it two at a time. Very quickly, 30 seconds. What can we do to attract men? And what evidence do we need to improve our interventions? Who wants to go first? Let's go with Cecilia. Cecilia, and then we go around the room.
Thanks, Swan. I think that we need to be creative. In Bolivia, we have a network, we have a Latin American network, and we try to attract men based on what they like. Sometimes it's related to food, and sometimes in workshops we offer snacks and so on. Or sometimes we include football or things they like to do, and anti-sexist championship or tournament. We don't talk about masculinities because there is bad advertising about what masculinities are about. So we try to be more attractive about what they want to work. For example, raising kids, sexuality in young people. We can use those titles that are more attractive. And it also depends on if the process will be more informative, will be more related to application. It depends on the duration of our trainings. And also we try to measure the consequences or the implications of our actions. And also we try to measure how we reach people. So those are the strategies we use. And now we are working on the digital environment. So we can go beyond the borders of our country. We have a different reach now. And we can do dynamic things in the online environment. There are so many apps now. For example, game, we can include game aspects that it's very
ayuda
important. They
mucho,
are
¿no?
very
en los
attractive. They
talleres.
help a lot in our workshops.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Cecilia. So we have how we attract and how we can impact and get data. Next, who wants to share in response to those two questions? Okay. Yes, Abhishek.
Maybe in my context, how we work with men, because sometimes it's a bit difficult. But one thing we have learned is because of our settings, we have so many local leaders, cultural institutions, and many of these are really men. So you work with them. Many of them have really been transformed like through our constant engagement with them. So if the local council chairperson calls for a meeting for men, they will most likely show up than if me, a lady from my organization, goes and calls men. So we work with the existing structures where men have that power, and we work with them, have engagement with them. So of course, one or two will be transformed, then they will go continue transforming others. But even the people who used to speak to them, you get a man, a male ally or a male champion, because from my experience, men listen to fellow men. It will make sense when it comes from another man speaking. And when it comes to a woman, for you, you look like a busybody, right? So we work with allies to be the ones to convey these messages, to have sessions with them, and you get positive feedback from them at the end of the session that, oh, this did not make sense. We thought you just coming to attack us, blah, so it starts to make sense for them. Yeah, so that's what we
Yeah,
do.
connect. Yes, you see how evaluating the context to see what works there is really creative, as Cecilia was saying. Thank you, Ruti, for the really good resources you've been sharing in the chat. I think our audience really enjoys having access to that. I see that people are also sharing their solutions. Colleagues, it is now 10:30. So I just want to say thank you so much for your very rich, broad, and deep responses to these questions, and for the deep engagement from our all of our community that have joined today. I know we could continue to talk more and more, but I'm going to turn you back over to Lakshman to just wrap up our session and invite you to the next in the three-part series. Lakshman, over to you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Abhishek, Cecilia, Ravi, and Ruti, for your amazing insights and wisdom. I hope all of the colleagues who joined have found it useful to start thinking more on these questions, these things that have come up today, to further unpack the concepts and understanding and potentially what the ways forward will look like. So we will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time as well. The next session will be on the 24th of September. You will receive communications through the medium you received for the first one as well. So do look out for that, and we will be sending more information. And thank you very much for staying with us. And we know there's always little time for big conversation like this one, but we hope we will continue coming together and find ways to share our thoughts, more wisdom, and collectively try and attempt to unpack this complex issue that we are talking about and find some really, really promising way forward. So we look forward to having you in the upcoming session series. And thank you all today for joining. And also thank you to my GS team for all the support to make this happen. And especially to you, Suan, for this excellent facilitation, and the way you did really was helping. And thank you all for sharing the resources. We will compile those resources as well, and we will come back later. So thank you all so much. Have a good rest of the day, night, evening, and take time to rest. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Lakshman.